To understand an individual's value of literacy in relation to their place, you must first look at place differently. An individual's place is much more than coordinates on a map. It's socially constructed by sponsors who influence literacy's value and the economic and political forces that shape its path. For the people who call the Ozark region home, they understand all too well how place should not be seen as one stereotyped story, but as an assemblage of thousands of equally important stories. Collectively, these stories mold the region's purpose and value of literacy. One such story is John Henderson, a middle school history teacher in Boone County. John's story begins 1957 in Phoenix, Arizona. As a child, beyond his mother reading Dr. Seuss, the first book John recalls belonging to him was from his grandmother, Christmas, 1963, featuring pictures about Kennedy and his assassination. He was then able to share his book amongst his classmates. John remembers weeks of looped broadcast news coverage on the 3 available TV channels, witnessing significant political developments that gripped the nation. John's literacy was encouraged by those modeling literacy around him: grandparents who wrote letters and read detective magazines, a grandfather who loved history and old westerns, his mother who enjoyed reading, and a sister who would write letters to pen pals around the world. Together, these sponsors also supplied access to literacy materials, including books, comics to trade with friends, records, and board games. John recalls his mother subscribing to magazines found in doctors' and dentists' offices. He eagerly awaited for each new issue, excited to receive something in the mail. Over the course of his primary education, John developed a profound fondness for reading nonfiction. He distinctly remembers an assignment that catered to this interest, which involved reading biographies for credit, and found himself competing with a fellow classmate, reading 45 biographies during a 9-week period. Eventually, he read all the biographies offered by the school library, at some level restricting his literacy, as he had to move on to books he was less interested in. John's 5th grade teacher belonged to the John Birch Society, and would subject students to listening to his political rhetoric. In one particular instance, this teacher told him that in order to pass math, he would have to attend a society meeting. John's grade school experience was nearly derailed. If it wasn't for his 6th grade teacher, Mr. Baker, his attitude towards school would have been greatly affected. But Mr. Baker subsequently revived this experience by creating a promising environment that allowed students to exude confidence. John sees confidence and self-sufficiency as crucial. These fundamental attributes are represented amongst John's parents. His father dove headfirst into unfamiliar territory, building his own roller rink. Without formal training, his father read books on construction and secured financing in tandem with a few clever tricks. The rink served as a family business and a catalyst for subsequent business success. It's hard to believe that just months prior to opening, his parents would eat old stock vegetables thrown out behind their local Safeway. They eventually retired to Harrison, buying acreage for a farm. John mirrors his parents' entrepreneurial spirit throughout his life. As a child, with the $1 received from his allowance, he would buy comic books separately so that he didn't meet the minimum requirement for paying tax. He was able to use the $1 to get 8 comic books and 4 pieces of gum. He also accrued rolls of $50 and looked for the Kennedy halves, which were still 40% silver, and would exchange the coins for a 75% profit. At 18, while taking a course on operating a small business, he dropped out of college to launch a successful video game venture. Economic development and rising popularity of video games led to the eventual growth of video arcades, prompting him to reallocate his efforts to real estate and becoming a commodities broker. Years later, he moved to Harrison to help his parents manage the farm. But after his eyes were swollen shut during a mow, he realized his allergies would be a true detriment. So John furthered his literacy and obtained an associate's degree from North Ark, as it did not offer a 4-year program at the time. He then learned of alternative certification programs available for aspiring teachers. His love of history, compounded with past experiences in history classes, fueled his desire to not only teach history, but to fundamentally enhance the student experience by implementing more creative and thought-provoking teaching methodologies. Taking a year off work, living on his dad's property, and having become a good test taker, he completed the Excelsior program in 8 months, becoming the first in his family to obtain a bachelor's degree. Having been certified to teach secondary social studies, John applied to numerous schools across the state. To his frustration, the first question was often, "What do you coach?" He found that schools were less likely to hire a social studies teacher unless they would also coach athletics. He was eventually able to secure a teaching position at Harrison Middle School, where he teaches today. An individual's literacy is cultivated by their environment and is a product of the many interactions that occur over the span of their lifetime. John's value of literacy was formed from sponsors and the economic and political institutions that are interwoven throughout his story. He has also had to acquire new literacies, from introduction to technology to each new career venture. As a teacher, John's value of literacy has become reading digitally or listening to Audible in order to look for things that might impact his students, making something he enjoys have a larger purpose. Understanding the effect that place has on a student's literacy, teachers should transform their approach with students, as each are unique, coming from different places that are actively shaping their literacy. This approach could allow them to better acknowledge their students' needs, while also focusing on critical literacy, encouraging students to recognize the impact that their story has and how it can shape the place in which they live. Every individual can identify improvements to be made in their community and make a difference. John's story proves this by his advocacy despite pushback to implement the EAST program, which focuses on how technology can solve problems in the community. Due to the misplaced stigma that plagues the city, upon hearing Harrison, Arkansas, one may not initially think of education as a priority. But Harrison, Arkansas is not one story. It is John's story, and thousands of other stories, each bringing rich literacies to form the place they call home.